The Nile runs red, not with blood, though there will be plenty of that, but with the desert sand that shouldn't be here. The storm came from nowhere, just like it always does. Crops destroyed, order shattered, and somewhere in that chaos, between the howling wind and the terrified prayers, you hear laughter. Deep, violent, unhinged. The kind that makes you understand why the ancient Egyptians had 40 different words for fear. This is ancient Egypt uncovered, and this is Set. The god so dangerous, so evil, that ancient Egypt tried to delete him from existence. You've probably heard of Egyptian gods. Ra with his sun, Anubis with his scales. But here's what most people don't realize. There's one god whose very name became a curse. Not because he ruled death or judged souls, but because he represented something far more terrifying. The part of existence that doesn't care about your prayers, your pharaoh, or your civilization. Set wasn't born evil. That's what makes this story so disturbing. For centuries, he stood on the prow of Ra's solar bark, spearing the chaos serpent Apophis every single night. The strongest of the gods, the necessary force, the controlled violence that kept worse violence at bay. Then something happened. Something so unforgivable that writing his name could curse your entire bloodline. So shocking that priests spent centuries trying to erase every trace of his existence. So devastating that it turned Egypt's greatest protector into their ultimate nightmare. The story I'm about to tell you has been hidden for 3,000 years, and once you hear it, you'll understand why. To understand how Set became evil, we need to go back to the night he became necessary. 3100 BCE. The war between Upper and Lower Egypt had just ended. The Nile was still carrying bodies to the sea. In the aftermath of the bloodiest conflict Egypt had ever seen, the gods assembled to decide who would protect this fragile new kingdom. Two gods stepped forward: Horus, young and golden, hero of the unification, and Set, older, stronger, with sand still dripping from his fur from battles nobody else would fight. "I ended the war," Horus declared, and it was true. His followers had won. But Set? Set just laughed. That laugh the other gods knew too well. "Tell them about last night," Set said to Ra. "Tell them about Apophis." The chamber went silent, because every god knew what happened when the sun traveled through the underworld. How the cosmic serpent Apophis waited in the darkness, jaws wide enough to swallow existence itself. And every god knew who stood at the front of Ra's boat with a spear. "While you were playing war with humans," Set continued, his red eyes scanning the assembly, "I was killing the thing that wants to eat reality. Every single night." Ra spoke then. The king of gods, the sun himself, made his choice. Horus shall rule the people. Set shall rule the storm. Both are necessary. But here's what the ancient texts reveal that changes everything. Set smiled when he heard this. Not the smile of someone who'd won, the smile of someone who'd just been given permission. The pyramid texts, carved in stone around 2400 BCE, preserve what Set said next. Necessary. He tasted the word. "I am necessary." For 1,000 years, that word would define him. Set the necessary. Set the strong. Set who keeps Apophis at bay. Every morning when the sun rose, Egyptians knew it was because Set had won another battle in the dark. Every storm that brought rain to the desert, Set. Every enemy turned away at the borders, Set's fury keeping them at bay. But power is a funny thing. When everyone agrees you're necessary, you start to wonder, necessary for what? When your job is to be violent so others can be peaceful, when your nature is chaos so others can have order, when you're the monster who fights monsters, who decides when you've been violent enough. Set was about to answer that question himself. And his brother Osiris, the beloved god who'd just returned from civilizing the world, he had no idea he'd been measured in his sleep. No idea that necessary was about to become something else entirely. No idea that Set had been building something in the desert, something that would fit a god perfectly. Before we get to the murder, yes, there's a murder coming, you need to understand the moment Set stopped pretending to be satisfied with necessary. The Contendings Papyrus preserves a story that most retellings skip, a divine trial that happened before the famous one, before Osiris died, when all the gods were still family. Isis had come to Ra with a complaint. Set had killed her sacred serpent, not Apophis, one of her messenger snakes, killed it for crossing his desert without permission. It was one snake, Isis said to the tribunal, a messenger. It carried prayers. Set stood before the assembled gods, blood still under his human fingernails. Everything in the desert is mine to kill. That was our agreement. It wasn't a threat, Isis argued. Everything's a threat, Set replied. And then, the papyrus is specific about this. He looked directly at Osiris, especially things that pretend they're not. Thoth, god of wisdom, tried to mediate. Set, you protect us from chaos. You don't create it. That's when Set said something that made every god in the room lean back. Who decides the difference? The trial should have ended there, should have been a warning. But Osiris, perfect, civilized, beloved Osiris, stood up and did the worst thing possible. He laughed. "Brother," Osiris said, and the warmth in his voice was genuine, which made it worse. "You're necessary, but you're not special. We all have roles. Yours is to obey. Mine is to rule. That's order." The chamber fell silent. Even Ra shifted uncomfortably. Set's red skin went pale, then crimson, then that deep black that only appeared before storms. "Obey," Set repeated, tasting that word too. Osiris, god of wisdom and civilization, master of agriculture and law, missed the danger completely. He put his hand on Set's shoulder. "It's not an insult, brother. The hand needs the eye. The eye needs the hand. We all serve Ma'at." Set looked at that hand on his shoulder, the hand of a god who'd never fought Apophis, never stood in the darkness with only a spear between existence and void, never been necessary. "You're right," Set said finally. His voice was calm, too calm. "We all have roles." He left the trial without another word, went back to his desert, back to his storms, back to protecting Ra's boat each night like nothing had changed. But something had changed. The Berlin Papyrus mentions that Set started visiting Osiris more often after that trial, bringing gifts, asking about his travels, learning about his measurements, height, width, the span of his arms when he stretched after waking. Such a devoted brother. So interested in everything about Osiris, especially his exact dimensions. The party was perfect. That should have been the first warning. Set never threw parties. For 3,000 years, he'd been the god who stood apart, the one who ruled the empty places. But here he was, hosting a celebration for Osiris's return from spreading civilization across the world. The Turin Papyrus preserves every detail of that night. How Set arrived late to his own party. Classic Set, everyone laughed. How he seemed genuinely happy, genuinely proud of his brother. How he'd had too much wine. How he kept stumbling, slurring his words, playing the fool. All an act. Set hadn't touched a drop. "Brother," Set called out, his voice carrying across the hall. I have something for you." The 72 accomplices were already in position. 72, the exact number of degrees the stars move in 1 year. This wasn't random. This was cosmic precision. Servants brought in the chest. Even drunk, even celebrating, every god in that room stopped breathing when they saw it. Gold from Nubia, lapis lazuli from the eastern mountains, cedar from Lebanon, inscriptions in languages that predated words. This wasn't just a chest, it was the most beautiful object ever created. "A game," Set announced, swaying on his feet. "Whoever fits inside perfectly wins it." The gods laughed. Of course, Set would make everything a contest. God after god tried. Too tall, too short, too wide. Each failure brought more laughter, more wine, more jokes. "Your turn, brother," Set said to Osiris. "Here's the detail that breaks my heart every time." Osiris hesitated. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, some ancient instinct older than civilization. But then he looked at Set, stumbling, drunk, foolish Set, and the moment passed. Osiris climbed into the chest. He fit perfectly, because Set had measured him for weeks, while he slept, while he bathed, while he taught humans how to plant grain. Set had taken every measurement down to the width of a hair. The lid slammed down. The laughter stopped. Set wasn't drunk anymore, wasn't stumbling. His movements were precise, practiced, prepared. The molten lead was already heated. The seals were already carved. The 72 accomplices moved like a machine. "Set!" the god screamed. "What are you doing?" Set looked at them with those red eyes that had watched Apophis die 10,000 times. "My role," he said simply. "I'm being necessary." They tried to stop him. But remember, every god had already admitted Set was the strongest. In combat, in rage, in pure physical power, nobody could match him. He sealed that chest with Osiris screaming inside, sealed it with lead and power and curses that would last forever. But the worst part? Set didn't hide what he'd done. He dragged that chest to the Nile in full view of heaven and earth, threw it in the river like it was garbage, watched it sink. "Why?" Thoth asked, the only god brave enough to speak. Set turned, and for the first time in 3 millennia, he looked genuinely confused by the question. "He said I wasn't special," Set replied. He was wrong. The chest floated down the Nile, carrying the god of civilization toward the sea. Set went back to his desert, back to his duties. That night, he stood on Ra's bark and fought Apophis like nothing had happened. But Isis, who knew magic older than the gods themselves, was already searching. She would find her husband. She always would. And when she did, Set would have to get creative. Isis found the body. Of course she did. Hidden it in the papyrus marshes, protected by spells that could kill a god. But Set had been killing gods every night for millennia. Just one. Apophis. Over and over. He knew exactly how hard it was to make something divine stay dead. The Westcar Papyrus describes what happened next, though later dynasties tried to burn every copy. Set didn't come as a destroyer this time. He came as a mourner, weeping for his brother, ashamed of what he'd done, begging Isis to let him perform the funeral rites. "Please," Set wept, and his tears turned the sand to mud. "Let me prepare him for the afterlife. It's the least I can do." Isis, goddess of magic, keeper of true names, possibly the smartest being in creation, made one mistake. She believed grief could change someone. She left Set alone with the body. What happened next made the murder look merciful. Set didn't just cut Osiris apart, he did it with surgical precision. 14 pieces, each one representing a part of Egypt, each one sized to fit in a box he'd already prepared. But here's the detail that reveals Set's true genius. He didn't scatter the pieces randomly. He placed each one at a sacred site. The head at Abydos, the heart at Athribis, the backbone at Osiris. He was marking territory, claiming Egypt piece by piece, turning the entire country into a crime scene that could never be cleaned. And the 14th piece? The phallus, the symbol of creation, regeneration, continuation. Set fed it to the fish, not just any fish. The Oxyrhynchus, the sacred fish of the Nile. The fish that would become cursed for 3,000 years because of what it swallowed. Set had turned Egypt's own sacred animals into accomplices. When Isis discovered what had happened, her scream shattered temples 1,000 miles away. But Set? Set was already back on Ra's boat, fighting Apophis, being necessary. "You have to stop him," Isis begged Ra. "I can't," Ra replied. And for the first time in creation, the sun god sounded afraid. If Set doesn't fight Apophis, he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what would happen if Apophis won even once. No sunrise, no reality, no anything. Set had made himself truly necessary. Not just helpful, not just useful, essential to existence itself. He could murder, dismember, desecrate, and the gods couldn't do anything because they needed him alive more than they needed justice. But Isis was about to prove that magic was stronger than muscle, and Horus, the son she would conceive with Osiris's reassembled corpse, would grow up with only one purpose: to prove that Set wasn't as necessary as he thought. The trial lasted 80 years. The contendings of Horus and Set Papyrus preserves every argument, every dirty trick, every moment when the gods themselves nearly came to blows. On one side, Horus, golden child, rightful heir, son of the murdered god. On the other, Set, necessary evil, strongest of the gods, keeper of the balance. The charge was simple: murder. The defense was simpler. So? "I did what I was created to do," Set argued. "I am chaos. I am destruction. You made me this way. You needed me this way. Now you're angry that I am what you required me to be?" The gods shifted uncomfortably, because he was right. They had needed Set to be violent. They had needed him to be chaos. They had celebrated when that violence was aimed at Apophis. "But Osiris was your brother," Isis said. "Apophis is Ra's brother," Set countered. "I kill him every night. You cheer." The trial went in circles, legal arguments, physical contests, tricks and counter-tricks. Set turned himself into a hippopotamus. Horus turned himself into a hunter. Set poisoned Horus. Isis healed him. On and on, while Egypt waited for a resolution. But here's the part most retellings miss. Set was winning. Not the contests. Those went back and forth. But the argument. Every time the gods tried to condemn him, Set reminded them of that night's battle with Apophis. Every time they moved toward judgment, Set would miss one night of protection, and Apophis would get closer to Ra's boat than ever before. "You want justice?" Set asked the tribunal. "Then fight your own battles. Protect your own son. Save yourselves from annihilation every single night." Silence. Finally, Thoth proposed a compromise. Set would keep the desert, the storm, the foreign lands. Horus would rule Egypt. Osiris would rule the underworld. Balance restored. But Set laughed. That same laugh from the beginning. "You still don't understand," he said. "I don't want to rule Egypt." I wanted to prove something. Prove what? Ra asked. Set looked at each god in turn, at their fear, at their need, at their hatred. That necessary and evil are the same word. You just spell them differently. For another 1,000 years, Egypt tried to live with this compromise. Set fought Apophis. Priests made offerings to keep him satisfied. Some pharaohs even took his name, Seti I, Seti II. They understood the bargain. But around 1000 BCE, something changed. The offerings stopped. The temples were abandoned. The inscriptions were chiseled away. Because Egypt had finally asked the question nobody wanted to answer. What if Set was right? What if necessary and evil were the same thing? What if by accepting that some violence was required, they'd given all violence permission? So they tried something unprecedented. They tried to delete a god. Not kill. They couldn't kill Set without losing the sun. But erase, remove, forget. Every statue defaced. Every cartouche chiseled out. Every prayer burned. They would pretend Set had never existed. The empty spaces tell the story better than any words could. In temple after temple, you can see where Set used to be. Perfect God-shaped holes in the walls. Shadows where hieroglyphs were removed so violently the stone itself cracked. But you can't erase a force of nature. The storms still came. The desert still burned. And every night something still fought Apophis, even if nobody wanted to name it anymore. Let's talk about what Set actually looked like. Because the ancient Egyptians were trying to tell us something with their impossible god. The Sha-Animal. That's what we call it because we literally don't know what it is. Not a dog, not a donkey, not anything that exists. A creature built from pieces that shouldn't fit together. Square snout, rectangular ears, forked tail. Other gods had sacred animals you could point to. Set's animal was wrong on purpose. The color tells the rest of the story. Red, Deshret, in ancient Egyptian. Not the noble red of Lower Egypt's crown. The other red, desert red, dried blood red. The red of things that shouldn't be red. But here's the disturbing detail. Ancient priests couldn't even agree on what color Set was. Some papyri show him pale, others crimson, others black. Like he wouldn't hold still long enough to be captured. Like chaos itself was refusing to be defined. The hieroglyph for Set's name, Sutek, literally translates to instigator of confusion, not creator. Instigator. Like the confusion was already there, waiting, and Set just released it. Every artistic representation shows Set in profile, never full face, always peripheral, always in the corner of your vision where paranoia lives. The Egyptians were showing us that some things shouldn't be looked at directly. But the detail that changes everything? Set is the only Egyptian god drawn with human hands accomplishing divine tasks. While Thoth needed an ibis head to write, and Anubis needed jackal jaws to judge, Set's human hands killed a god. He didn't need special powers, he just needed permission. Set wasn't erased, he adapted. Every empty space where his name used to be tells his story. Every defaced statue preserves his outline. The Egyptians thought they were deleting him, but they were actually making him eternal. You can't see Set anymore, but you can see the Set-shaped holes everywhere. When the Greeks came, they found these empty spaces and asked what belonged there. The Egyptians would only say, Typhon, their word for the monster beneath the mountain. The Greeks took that name home. The Romans spread it further. Different names, same force. The Sha-Animal appears in psychology textbooks now, though they don't call it that. Jung wrote about the shadow, the part of human nature we refuse to acknowledge. The necessary evil we all carry, the violence we need, but won't name. Set's specific domains still resonate. He ruled the liminal spaces, the borders, the edges, the places where one thing becomes another. Today, those spaces have different names. The moment before sleep when you hear something wrong. The second of silence before bad news. The pause before violence. Red still means danger in every culture touched by Egypt's influence. 5,000 years later, we're still using Set's color to mean stop and warning and danger. The Egyptians coded something into human consciousness that we can't uncode. But perhaps the most relevant echo appears in how we handle necessary dangers. The Egyptians kept Set in their pantheon even after declaring him evil. They couldn't destroy him because he still fought Apophis. They needed him, hated him, and feared him simultaneously. We have our own versions of this paradox, forces we depend on while knowing they could turn destructive, systems that protect and threaten simultaneously. The Egyptians were the first to document this uncomfortable relationship with necessary monsters. Their records show they understood eventually. Late-period texts mention Set obliquely, carefully, with protective spells. Not worship, but acknowledgement. Not acceptance of his evil, but recognition that some things can't be erased, only managed. They learned you can't delete chaos. You can only document it and hope the next civilization handles it better. So why was Set the Egyptian god so evil they erased him from history? It wasn't the murder. Other gods killed. It wasn't the chaos. Egypt had gods for that. It was because Set proved something nobody wanted to be true. He proved that every system creates its own destroyer. Every order generates its own chaos. Every family has someone measuring them while they sleep. Set was the god who broke the most sacred trust. He didn't just kill Osiris, he killed his brother. He didn't just bring chaos, he brought it from inside the family, inside the system, inside the very order he was supposed to protect. But here's the truth, the empty spaces reveal. Set won. He wanted to prove that necessary and evil were the same word, and every chiseled-out cartouche proves him right. He wanted to show that you can't have order without chaos, and every storm confirms it. He wanted to demonstrate that violence accepted is violence unleashed, and 3,000 years of history agrees. The Sha-Animal still appears in dreams, that thing that's almost familiar but wrong. The shadow that's almost a shape but isn't. The laugh in the storm that sounds almost human. Set didn't disappear when they erased his name. He just stopped needing one. He's still there, in the space between order and chaos, in the moment between trust and betrayal, in the second when protection becomes predation. In every necessary evil we tell ourselves is just necessary. The ancient Egyptians couldn't erase him. They could only teach us to recognize him. The storm is coming. It always does. And somewhere in that chaos, between the howling wind and the terrified prayers, you'll hear that laughter again. Deep, violent, unhinged, necessary. But speaking of Egyptian gods who were erased, there's one whose removal was even more complete than Set's. A goddess so powerful, so uncontrollably violent, that Ra had to trick her with beer dyed blood red just to stop her from exterminating humanity. Next time, we'll uncover why Sekhmet, the lioness who killed for pleasure, became too dangerous even for gods who accepted Set. This has been Ancient Egypt Uncovered. Until next time, watch the storms carefully.